Hello, everyone. Oh, wait, no, we have to click on live. Let's click on go live right now. There you go. Click on go live on Alvin. Can you click on your end as well if you haven't on Instagram?
I did.
Cool. Awesome. Perfect. I see your beautiful faces on there.
Nice.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much.
Hey.
Oh, that was on my end. There you go. Okay. Awesome. Sorry, guys. Some technical difficulties here. Thank you guys so much for joining us here today on this Wednesday evening. As you know, if you're new here, basically what we do is we host an Ask Me Anything with some of my friends in the real estate industry. And this time around, we're bringing in guest expert and a good buddy of mine, Alvin Wong. For those of you who don't know who Alvin is, he's a real estate entrepreneur, multifamily investor. He's done everything from short-term rentals, medium rentals, long-term rentals. And most recently, he started up his venture, Tenant, Landlord Mediation Service, TLM, where he essentially mediates any sort of troublesome tenant or landlord relationships. Alvin, really appreciate you jumping on here today, man. How's everything going?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Austin. It's good to see you again.
It's always very exciting to have you on in these sort of podcasts because it's obviously like this is a hot button topic, you know, like especially with the way, and you know it best, especially with the way that Ontario is structured from a landlord tenant point of view. Mediation is extremely important. We're going to see a lot more delinquencies. For those who follow my stories on Facebook, I've been getting a lot of delinquencies recently. Not a lot, but like a decent amount of delinquencies, right? And so mediation is extremely important because like most people, they jump straight into getting paralegal. So actually, before we get into it, Alvin, hopefully I did you justice on that introduction. Is there anything I missed there? Is there anything that you want to add about yourself?
No, you didn't. Well, thanks for the grand opening for me. This is that's very nice of you. But no, you got everything correct.
Awesome. So guys, drop your questions down below. We will make sure to get to it as quickly as possible. And just want to make a quick disclaimer. Okay, so where's that disclaimer here? And you guys will probably see this disclaimer here as well, just like going down below. Just keep in mind, guys, everything that we talk about here is not legal or professional advice. Me and Alvin are both not paralegals or lawyers. Everything that's going to be discussed here is based on our own personal experience. Always consult with a legal professional before doing any of these things. We are not responsible if you do any of these things and it doesn't lead to the results that you're looking for. Okay, so keep that in mind when we discuss through these questions today. And without further ado, why don't we just jump right on into it, Alvin? Okay, so
yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so actually, why don't you start off by explaining what is a mediator and how is that sort of different than like getting a lawyer or a paralegal?
Yeah, so tenant landlord mediator is a neutral third party who helps resolve disputes between tenants and landlords outside of the formal legal proceedings. This is where the paralegal and also the attorney comes in. But for us, our goal in mediation is to facilitate the conversation, communication, find common ground, and reach mutually acceptable agreements that benefits both parties, the tenant and the landlord, while avoiding any time-consuming litigation and costly disputes. So the main thing to take home is like facilitating conversation, identify core issue. We focus on the finding resolution, reducing the cost of like renovation if there's any damages, reducing any like wait time. We all know how daunting LTV wait time is. So yeah. And then reducing the loss of rent if it comes down to that, and providing confidentiality as well too.
Yeah, and that's obviously really important, right? Because to your point, when you go through the legal proceedings, it can take a year before you hear anything. And I'm going through it right now, and it's like it's costing me a lot. Like mediation is always sort of a better alternative.
Yeah, and here's the interesting thing: every single city has their own wait time, which is inconsistent. I can tell you your home battleground, Windsor. I invest in. I used to invest in Windsor. Like that's exactly where my experience from the landlord tenant board is. It took 1 whole year, and that includes the whole process of filing, the whole process of waiting for the adjudicator to decide what the conclusion is, and then you have to get the sheriff. So it's very daunting.
Awesome. So I have some questions coming in on audio is super choppy. Huh.
Yeah.
It's my mic. I'm just going to hold my mic up to my face now. So we're getting some questions coming in both on Instagram and on YouTube. Our Facebook is having some issues, so I shared everyone our YouTube live. So why don't we start off with this? This is a good question, actually. How are you any different than a paralegal or a lawyer? Like, what makes your process different? And like, what from your experience, what have you seen paralegals do differently?
Yeah, again, the paralegal represents the individual. Oh,
Yeah, I think I can hear you. Are you guys able? Are you guys good? Going through it. Can everyone hear us? I assume so. Yeah. Okay. I think you're good to go, Alvin.
yeah. So the paralegal, like I said, represents the landlord in this situation with the hearing process. That's exactly what the paralegal role is, and also helping them filing and escalating within the court to help the landlord to handle the dispute, what the problem is. With mediation, we go personally into to meet and greet the tenant, and we bridge the gap between the conversation for the landlord and the tenant to have a conversation and to facilitate the communication and to fairly create a fair mutual agreement that both sides agree to and resolve the conflict. So we go deep into it. We go straight to the door and we start knocking on it and start bridging the gap.
Yeah, and I know you got to give a diplomatic answer, Alvin. You're in the business here. I can maybe I'll give a little bit more color. Because I know you work with a lot with paralegals too. Here's the thing: is your paralegal will never go in person and spend like an hour negotiating with the tenant, right? Like they have their function, they have their purpose, right? People need to work with paralegals, but at the end of the day, most of them will work through a laptop, file whatever, and that's about it, right? And then just you sort of sit down and wait. But as you mentioned at the beginning, dude, you wait 8 months, 9 months, and that's going to cost you a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah, yeah, and you can't blame them for that because of like they are by law and obligated to represent the landlord in the court, right? So
Yes.
outside of the court, it can be in a gray area for them. And if I was a paralegal, like I would rather stick to the correct route, which is going straight to the court system and just have everything all done there. But and you said it exactly right, and the numbers are not new. It takes at least 6 to 12 months on average in Ontario for every single city to have a conclusion. But with mediation, you're going in there, you resolve the issue, and we do it very fast.
Sorry, guys. I'm seeing your questions on Instagram, so I'm like copying it down here. Okay,
Yeah.
question from Nisha. Nisha said hi to you, Alvin, by
Oh,
the way.
hi, Nisha.
And question from her via YouTube. So if anything is choppy on Instagram, guys, you can also join on YouTube. How do you approach mediation when a tenant refuses to communicate? So I'm sure you get that often where they just go MIA or just don't answer to you.
Well, I would like to find out exactly what the root cause of that. But before even doing that, this is something very. This is a very great question. What I would do is whatever the form of communication you want to do, however they originally want to, how they've been communicating, whether email, voicemail, or texting. Take note of this. All you need to say is, "Have you given up on restoring our communication?" That's all you need to say, because this is a very powerful question because it gives you two things. It tells you exactly, do they want to communicate with you? You get the answer straight away. It's a yes or no. That's it. If they respond back to you, that means they willing to communicate. If they want to. If they don't even say anything more, then it's a no. But you have to understand, you can't sell a car if no one wants to buy a car, right? So at that point, for a landlord, if they were doing this themselves, you know, you did what you can. But one thing for certain is that in not all the cases, but tenant always will see the landlord a little bit more of a threat. They see because the landlord has a little bit more say into the conversation. So they feel intimidated. They may not want to talk to the landlord anymore because of that. So that's why landlords call me so that I can bridge the gap, bridge the communication, so that both sides can communicate again.
Right. So I guess sometimes, if it depends on who reaches out, right? If it sounds like if the communication and the trust has been broken between the landlord, sometimes it's tough to mend that, right? You almost do need like a third party to have that conversation. That's a great question to ask, by the way, right? Because it sort of puts them in the hot seat. Awesome. I'm just curious, by the way, do you find that, okay, let's think about it like this. Let's think about like someone stopped paying rent, and let's say that they're not communicating, right? Like someone's like stop paying rent and you've reached out and they don't communicate. Do you serve them with, no, not you, like paralegal, right? Whatever. Or like, I guess the landlord, would you encourage them to serve them with the notice? And do you find that when that happens, all of a sudden the tenant reaches out to you when they get the notice? They're like, whoa, like, hey, like, what is this? Da 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 da. Or does that make things even worse from your experience?
Yeah, it's really it's actually moving up the chain of escalation. I always ask the landlord to first open up the communication first, like a warm introduction, and also like bridge the communication. We always serve them like a non like legal papers, like say, hey, we really want to reach out. We want to like have a conversation. We really want to like resolve the conflict between you and I. Is there any areas that we can meet or have a conversation so we can resolve this before it becomes worse? See what happens. If they continue not, then that's when I would advise the landlord to, with the N4, you can do it. They can do it themselves, but most landlords are not comfortable. Then I would ask them to have the paralegal to professionally write the letter so that it can be served to the tenant. From there, we'll see what happens. If the communication continues, then we don't need to escalate any more further. We can just jump in and just start having our conversation, resolve it on the spot. So I do work with paralegals and attorneys a lot. I even work with police officers. The main thing is to restore communication, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do.
Right. No, so totally makes sense. Okay. So just looking at which questions we had, how do you mediation?
Curious to know.
Okay, here it is. Doing N4. Okay, so this might be a little bit of a technical question. Hey, guys, by the way, if it's like overly technical question, again, like we are not lawyers or paralegals, we'll try our best to answer it, but it's not professional or legal advice. So I have a rental and a tenant stopped paying a while ago. I also have my son. I recently put his name on the home. So the son on the home I don't think is relevant, right? It's just I have a rental and they stopped paying rent. Better doing an N4 or an L1? Sir, let me double check an L1. I think an L. Okay.
The L1 is the escalation of the N4, which is non-payment rent. In this case, it doesn't look like it's a non-paying rent tenant, is it?
Oh, yeah, I have a tenant stop paying rent. Yeah.
It is better doing N4. So yeah, like N4 is a proper channel. And that's what the paralegal would advise if you were to seek legal advice. The N4 is what you will be serving to the tenant. And then once after, I believe after, correct me if I'm wrong, Austin, after 14 days, that's when you can you submit the L1 form.
Yeah. So to answer your question, an N4, and you answered it right at the beginning, the L1 is an escalation of an N4. When you serve an N4, the LTB doesn't know that you serve the N4. Like it's just a piece of paper you hand over to them. To advise the LTB, that's when you serve, to your point, you have to file the L1. So it's just like the chronological order. They're not the same thing, but they almost are, right? Like you got to follow the steps.
Yeah, so that's the proper channel of doing things. But again, like once from N4 to L1, there's a big chunk of time, and then from the L1, you're waiting until you get a court hearing.
Let me ask you this, Alvin. So I'm just gonna throw a scenario at you. If someone doesn't pay rent, like how do you usually go about it? I'm curious. Is there sort of a structure that you have in place?
Sorry, I missed out on that one. What was it, Austin?
Let's say I'm sure this is a situation you deal with all the time, right?
Mhm.
One of your clients, they're saying my tenant hasn't paid rent in 3 months.
Yeah.
Sort of how do you go about a situation like that?
Yeah, so I mean, like you first want to find out what the problem is, right? Like, what was the reason why they're not paying the landlord rent, right? From there, you'll be able to understand a little bit more. So the main thing is it's very depending on like the scenario, but the whole point of it is to find out the reason for why it is. I think um, a lot of people don't understand is that it's very important to hear what the tenants say, and from there you'll be able to resolve the issue by working it with the tenant.
Maybe what we can do is give an example. So like you again, like I know that you have these conversations all the time. Obviously you don't have to name the name of the tenant or anything like that, but maybe
Yeah,
walk through an example of a time that you've actually sort of done that and what the reason was and how you were able to resolve it.
yeah. So like, what there's one of my success story is that I simply went up to the tenant, um, and the tenant told me something completely different than what the landlord was telling me. So obviously there was a communication error between the landlord and the tenant. It proves out the tenant does have. It proves that the tenant just needed a couple more days to to pack and to have a moving truck before they can leave. But because they're not leaving is because they need time for the place where they're going to is it's still not vacant yet, so they needed some time. Somewhere in between the communication between the landlord and tenant, there was a miscommunication where both sides did not understood what happened, and so that's why they called me, so that I set the tone, non-bias. I set the positive environment where the tenant is able to let me know what their concern is. Whereas the tenant was also telling me that it was very intimidating talking to the landlord, and also it was very hard to reach the landlord as well too. So having a third party like myself, that's why I get called, so that I can figure out what the issue and then see if there's a amicable amicable solution to resolve the conflict. Yeah.
Have you had a situation, just digging down deeper, where like, the common one is like someone lost their job, for example.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, like I've lost my job. How do you approach it? That's a difficult conversation, right? Because
It is. Yeah.
it's like, how long is it going to take them to get employment, right? Are they able to continue to afford living here? Um,
Yeah.
have you had a situation like that? And like, how do you? And if not, just let me know. But I'm curious because I think that's going to be more common this year.
Yeah. So at this time, I haven't had any conversation or approach anyone that has a scenario like that. Um, it's definitely for certain. Like during these economic times, we're gonna be seeing more of that, and because of that, I would definitely for sure like eventually I'll get something to resolve these conflicts. But again,
Yeah.
mediation is about hearing both side of the story. Mediation is about bridging the communication so that the tenant and the landlord can communicate with one another to resolve an issue before it escalates and to become a judicial issue. It doesn't benefit anybody. It in fact it serves as a purpose to benefit both sides through mediation.
Right. Yeah. And honestly, like I guess when you're doing mediations, there's so many unique ways to structure things outside of just like, pay me all. Like for example, like going back to if someone lost lost their job, right?
Yeah,
And I would imagine as a landlord, like I want them out because I don't know how long it's going to take for them to get a job. I don't know how they're going to pay me their rents. Like, well, what if they just like, what if you speak to them and they're like, I have my mom will co-sign. It's like, oh, now you have someone that's on the hook,
yeah,
right? It's like, you never know until you have those discussions, and immediately people
yeah,
don't think that's the reason why like people hire people like you, right? It's just like
yeah,
immediately it's like, oh, I want to evict them, I want to kick them out. But it's like, there's so many other solutions out there. If you sit down and you ask them, then there could be a way to keep them there, and
yeah,
create a win-win for everyone while still protecting yourself.
yeah. Absolutely.
Um,
There's so many solutions. It doesn't have to be having someone to leave. Um, there's also opportunities for a discussion where the landlord can, if the conversation ends up that both sides agree to leave. Sometimes it's as easy, sometimes it's as simple as like helping them with moving boxes, providing them materials, providing them with storages for temporary storages so they can get them going, and providing them moving vans. I've had many conversations where the tenant the tenant was just like really ashamed to go back to their parents' place. But when I was able to help them connect with their family, like literally brought them to talk to their family, the family was like, they were very loving. They just said that, hey, we never see something like this. We never see you as anything. We're very proud of you. Please come back home. We're more than happy. And you know what? Next thing you know, they start to understand, and they want to go back home, and then we help them.
So we have a lot of questions coming in. That's an interesting example. How the hell did that even happen? How did you connect them with their family? Like that's very interesting. I'd like to dig down deeper into that. Like, could you walk us through what problem that was and how you were able to get that person to muster up the courage to speak with his family? And also, what was wrong? Was that guy not paying rent, or what was that situation?
Yeah, so the individual just all of a sudden like wasn't able to they wasn't able to have we wasn't able to have like funds to continue paying for the rents, and they were ashamed of going back home because they wanted to make their parents proud at the same time. And another thing was that the parents, one of their family member has dementia, and the only way they can come to their place was with dementia people are sticking to the routines, and they know once they know where you live, it's hard for them to continue to going to adjust to new environments. So that was one of their concern. The concern was that what happens if my mother cannot find where I live? And so having that conversation about bringing the idea of like, listen, like I don't want you to end up going to the LTB, which is a very even more shameful, if anything. It's better if you start looking at all the resources so that you can safely transition, and at the same time figure out how you would be able to find a new place. And so and so this is where the conversation brought up about the dementia of the family member and the shame of going back home. And I was like, well, have you spoken to your family? And he said no. And I was like, pull up your phone, let's call together, I'll be with you. And that's exactly what happened. He called, he told them that he's in a lot of financial trouble, and he needed to there's a possibility he needs to go back home. And the family member told him that, hey, we are so proud of you to come back home, we're more than happy. And he was talking about what about mom, like not able to find where I live? And the father was like, well, you have me, I can bring your mom to see you anytime, wherever you go. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I guess, a lot of people don't go down that deep. It's hard to have those conversations as a landlord when you're looking at someone as like, you owe me money. Right. And then it's just like, you always are so focused on like, hey, you owe me money. We don't need to have this sort of conversation here. So, no, obviously those convos are extremely important. So someone answered that individual's question N4, then file the L1. Yeah, so we already touched on this, so perfect.
Awesome. Front lobby, nice.
Okay, sorry, we already did touch on that as well. We sort of touched on this as well, how to get a non-paying tenant out in Ontario, right? Actually, let me make this let me ask you this directly. Do you recommend one day tenant doesn't pay rent? Are you going to file for yourself? Are you filing the N4 immediately?
For myself, my own tenants?
Yeah, and what is your recommendation, right? Again, guys, not legal advice, not professional advice. What do you think?
Again, like I said before, like it's best to have a general letter or email, just loosely, just casual, just let them know, hey, I have intention to really want to communicate with you. We obviously have a situation where I'm not receiving the rent funds. Is there something that I'm missing? Is there something that we can have a conversation and figure out the issue, and that's exactly how I would approach it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so before you serve it, immediately you ask them what's up, and then from there, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, because like you don't like it's better to solve the problem right away. I know a lot of landlords, when they come, by the time they come to me, they're already 6 months into the Judaico system.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and when I asked them, it's like, did you serve them? And fortunately, yeah, I served them 3 months after they stopped paying me rent. So I'm like 3 months. Yeah, by then it'll be too late. So highly recommend, as soon as there's an issue, as soon as you don't see any rent coming in, quickly have a conversation with the tenant and find out what the issue is.
Yeah, no, totally, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question here. Is it better to discuss issues in person, over the phone, written communication? What are you doing?
Yeah. So I like this question because me personally, I enjoy the face-to-face conversation. It's more personable. You get to see the nonverbal cues. You can see the body languages. There's something about like a human connection that builds something, builds communication, builds a positive environment. The phone is like, I'm not saying that phone doesn't work. I've done it before. Austin, I've seen you done it before. But I personally think that being in person better. Written communication, I love that as well too. It leaves paper trail, but there's not, again, not too personal. So at the end of the day, I still choose person. What do you think, Austin?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think in person is always the way to go, right? Nonverbal cues are extremely important. Body language, having a sense of you can sort of feel someone's body language, right? If they're slumped over and they're sad, that's where you almost take a pause and ask someone, like, what's going through your head?
Yeah.
You obviously look a little bit sad right now. Is there something deeper that I'm missing? But I will also say this, like, if it's a non-payment of rent, so let's say someone didn't pay rent for 1 day, I'm not just gonna drive all the way to Sudbury. I'd pick up the phone and I'll call them. If it's like they haven't paid in 3 months, that's like, or like 2 months, for example, then I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna drive there. But if it's just 1 day, a phone call, or to your point, like a text message doesn't hurt. And it's if they start ignoring you, where you're like, maybe I gotta go face to face and talk with them.
Yeah, exactly. But one thing I would say is that if you have a conversation, one thing I would say is that if you have a conversation with them in person, afterwards, you don't need to do much in person unless you feel like it. After one time in person, there's already enough communication. There's already a dialogue that you can go straight to over the phone. That's what I would suggest. Yeah.
Okay. So, I have a question for Alvin. I was wondering what kind of mindset shift had helped you the most when dealing with tenants. Actually, I don't think people know your background of your first tenant experience, because your first tenant experience was a nightmare, as with every single investor. You don't know what to do. So yeah, like, why don't you share your first experience and then share how you were able to gain that confidence to start dealing with them?
Yeah. So I think my very first negotiation was my own tenants. When I first picked up my duplex property, my very first duplex property in Windsor, I was having sleepless night. I was definitely panicking, anxiety, you name it. It was a very terrible experience, But the fact that I was able to have, after the first conversation, you develop courage. And you start to realize it is not as bad as you think it is. I think the main thing is like we always say, it is very true. Taking action is very important. No matter how difficult the conversation, you need to have that conversation. And you know what? Like, part of it was that I owe it to my nursing career. Like, we have a lot of difficult patient and also staff members, our own fellow coworkers, and you can't escape from it. You have to confront people. You have to learn to deal with conflict resolutions. And because of that, I was able to build up the courage enough to speak to the tenant, speak to my own tenants as well too. So I think the mindset shift right there is, the more you stall, the harder it is. Just do it.
Yeah, no, definitely. A lot of people, to your point, they're guilty of just outsourcing everything, property managers, paralegals, this and that, and then picking up and doing it themselves. And like, there's nothing wrong with outsourcing, right? Especially if you have a big portfolio. But no one's going to care about your properties as much as you do at the end of the day, right? Do you find that, actually, I had the question somewhere here. Let me open it up. It's a good question. It was a good question. I just can't. Here you go. This was a question. Should landlords introduce themselves as the owner or property manager to create better rapport?
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. That's a great question. And you know what? I've encountered enough landlords to figure out this. Okay. I've seen landlords use their own name. I've seen landlords use property manager, builder, you name it. The answer applies to everything. It's better to use your own your let them know that you are the landlord, because when you're dealing a professional tenant, truly delinquent professional tenant, they know exactly the name, and they're able to find out who you are. And if they find out who you are and you tell them that you're not a property manager or anything, you're not the landlord, you're a property manager or something, whatever you made up, they're going to find out, and they're going to hate you, and they're going to slam the door, and then there won't be any conversation. But here's another thing. It is a double-edged sword, because I've also gotten information from my clients, which is landlords, telling me they tried the landlord route, where they told them that truthfully they are the landlord. But here's the thing. Psychology-wise, the tenant, not all, but majority, tenant will always see you as a threat. They don't know how to communicate with you because you have a lot of say to your property. They think that the Judago system have you up there more than them, so they have to be very careful in that, and that creates very difficult for the tenant to open up and tell them what they truly are afraid of or whatever. So this is why landlord call me, because I'm a third party, non-biased, and they don't know me, the tenant don't know me, and they know that they can tell, and then the next day nothing will happen. So that's why landlords call me for that.
Yeah. And, to put it into perspective that hopefully some people understand, imagine like you're working at a job, right? A lot of us are working at jobs, and let's say that your boss, let's say you missed a deadline, like, like a tenant misses rent payment,
Yeah.
right? And the CEO comes to like, hey, dude, why did you miss the deadline? And maybe it's like, maybe you're just like, I kind of don't know what I'm doing. I need more guidance. You're not going to tell the CEO, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, man. Can you show me? CEO's, you're going to feel like you're an idiot. Versus if your coworker, same level, like if you're an analyst and another analyst buddy comes like, hey, man, you're just like, shoot, dude, I missed a deadline. It's like, oh, why? It's like, I don't know how to do this. And all of a sudden, like, the analyst can help you out. You're more open, right? Because it's like, you're not, to your point, you're not the threat. You're not the boss. You're not the owner. You're not the decision maker. Right.
Yeah.
So I totally get where you're coming from with that. One quick tip of what I do is like, I like that. I think a lot of people introduce themselves as a property manager, and I think I agree with you where it's like pretty easy to identify whether you're going to lie or not. They may eventually somewhere down the line find that out, and that just throws everything out the window. I like to say I'm a part owner and I have another owner. Right? Just two owners owning the property.
Yeah.
Because it, like, to your point, it alleviates this guy's decision maker. I'm like, no. I own a little bit of the property. There's another, like, we own it together, but he's like the big kahuna, right? So it almost like takes that away. But I get where you're coming from. You want to strip that tension away from the situation.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. Like, if you start, it's a double-edged sword. Like, there's no right or wrong answer, because I've heard all the cases. Some work, some doesn't. But so far, I've heard people are the more truthful you are, I feel like that's the best. That way, because the tenant's gonna find out, and if they do, you're in trouble.
Okay, so sorry, I'm just looking through the questions here.
Yeah.
Questions here as well. Where did we leave off? Okay, we did talk about this. But why don't you reiterate that again really quick? So if someone ignores communication, like what avenues are you doing again?
Yeah, so this is the one I was saying, like give them a text or however communication you guys were, the landlords was able to communicate with the tenant. If it's a telephone, voicemail, if they don't pick up, if it's a text message communication, just leave them saying that have you lost, have you decided to no longer want to communicate or continue on with building the relationship of resolving the issue. That's what I would say. And this will give you either a yes or no question, because the question is very simple. It's a very powerful question that leads to yes or no.
Yeah. Again, like I love that question, because in my mortgage business, I get a lot of people that like, I'm just tying it into my business.
Yeah.
Actually, it's the power of asking a powerful question. Sometimes, like, I'll have clients that or not clients, like leads. Someone like introduces me to someone, like, this person's looking potentially for a mortgage, and then we speak.
Yeah.
And then I don't hear from them again. And then we always, like, we're in the sales business, so we follow up, right? Follow up for a week or two, still nothing. And then I'll do something similar to what you said. I was like, hey, just wanted to touch base again and follow up. Look, if you decided to go another way, let me know, and I won't follow up with you anymore. That's totally okay. It's a similar question, but for my business that you're asking, but to the tenants, you're like, hey, is this communication dead? If so, like, let me know. And it almost, like, there's a yes or no. If they're quiet, I don't know for you, but I feel like if they don't respond, I still continue to follow up until they tell me, like, no, until they're like, I'm just not, like, it's not happening. Then I'm like, all right, okay, cool.
Yeah. I mean, like there's like I said, like follow up is don't underestimate the power of follow up. I agree with that. But with the landlord and tenant, it's very tricky, because if you follow up, that can be considered as harassment, right? So you have to be very careful at, like, when you don't want to be, the landlord needs, if it was to go to court, the landlord needs to be very careful that there's not enough evidence to accidentally. I've seen worse. I've actually sat in LTB just for fun, just to hear all the cases. So it helps me with my mediation service, so that I can be able to resolve conflicts based on, like, similar case studies. I've seen landlords got put in a spot where, hey, there's so many text messages of you following up saying that, hey, why are you not calling me? Have you pull similar line as what I said, but when you said too much, you follow too much, the tenant will use that against you. And then they will just say, hey, it's like my life feels threatened. They're bugging me too much when I clearly said I don't want to talk anymore by ignoring your questions. So you shouldn't be sending me messages. I feel uncomfortable. That is why I don't want to talk to the landlord. That's the reason. And that turned around. It was favor to the tenant.
Awesome. That's pretty cool. Yeah, sitting in the LTB hearings. That's obviously a good way to hear what people are doing wrong. Oh no, we already went through that question. There you go. What's one mediation tactic you used early in your career that's no longer recommended, and what have you replaced it with?
What's one mediation tactic you use recommended? Oh, good question, Nisha. Thank you for that. I have to think about this quite a bit. I would definitely.
Or, like, what are, I guess, like, another way to phrase this, like, what are mistakes that you made for the first one? Your first one, for no one, it's perfect, right? Like, what that you've done where it's like, I would have done this differently now that I know what I know.
Yeah, that's there are different. I'm just thinking a scenario what I've done, where exactly what you said, Austin, about, like, problems that I should have approached differently. It could be. I would say the most important one was to really communicate with the parties, so landlords. If there was a property manager involved, the line of communication should have been a little bit more clear, like what my role was. So I think what happened was, because when you involve too many parties, like you have the realtor, you have the property managers, and you have the landlord, it gets really messy. No one knows whose role it is. And for the tenant, they get really confused. And then when someone gets confused, they start to reserve, and they start to not communicate. And I think that's what happened. And I changed up I changed up the way my communication is. I now tell the landlord that it's between you and I. I only want one message. I only want one warm message from yourself, is to send it to the tenant that be prepared. Somebody is coming to represent me, the landlord, represent the landlord. He's a mediator, and if you can reserve this time right here, it's only 15 minutes. Have a conversation with him, and it's just to have a discussion. That's all.
Amazing. We have a few more questions to get through here. We'll try to do speed round because we have 20 minutes left. Okay, so in cases where tenants refuse cash for keys, so actually, what is cash for keys? Why don't you first explain what cash for keys even is?
Yeah, cash for keys is agreement between the landlord and the tenant to part ways, but that involves compensation, and
Right.
that compensation has to be agreed between both the landlord and the tenant. Once the compensation has been agreed, both sides both side will honor that agreement. So in this situation, the tenant will agree to vacate the unit for a certain amount of compensation, and the landlord has to agree to it, and both has to follow up what their say is and go from there.
Right. Look, Alvin, I don't know if you can answer this because you're a legitimate business. So if this is something that you got to be careful with,
Yes.
Just let me know. So what other incentive structures have worked for you? Are you able to sort of answer that, or is it an offline conversation that you should have?
Yeah, again, like this is a conversation that needs to happen between the landlord and the tenant. My role as a mediator is to bridge the conversation, restore communication, and to help both sides understand that it is better to work with each other than to escalate the situation. It is okay to there's cases where it makes sense to escalate. Okay, this is where the paralegal and the law society will come in. Okay, but if both sides agree that if both sides agree that compensation needs to be involved, this is between the landlord and the tenant. Okay. My role, again, like I said, is to mediate and to bridge the gap so that they can both communicate and sit down and talk, have a hard conversation, and to resolve together.
I guess my follow-up to that, Nisha, is what are you offering cash for keys for? Like, is the tenant delinquent? Is the tenant just under market rent and they're not doing anything wrong? If you're still on the live, maybe explain what that is, because that is going to make a difference, right? If the tenant's completely delinquent and is causing a ton of issues, like then that's where, Alvin, you can still step in, because like it's like, look, we're trying to work something out here. There's mediating because it's causing a lot of problems, so you're giving them money to leave. But if it's like the tenant is simply just paying under market rent, that's a totally different story on its own, right?
Yeah.
So I guess like Nisha, if you can clarify, we might be able to give a sort of a different answer. Anisha's on a roll.
Yeah.
Have you encountered a situation where mediation was impossible? And what was the alternative solution?
Yeah. So, I mean, it goes down to to every single story, as in, like, you cannot sell a car if someone doesn't want to buy a car, right? So there are limits to how far mediation goes. What I can tell you is that for all my clients that reaches out to me, we go beyond to talk to tenants, not just in person, but over phone, whatever communication. Our role is to make sure that there's communication involved. There's, like, as soon as someone closes the door, as soon as either side, landlord or tenant, decides to slam the door, then mediation will never work. So my role is to make sure that everyone is open to have a safe conversation and to really hear what each other say. And you know what? There are cases where, like for example, Austin and I were just talking about, if someone was to threaten you to burn down the house, like that is not mediation. This is a legal issue. You need to get legal advice.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to think. Like, actually, maybe I'll give a quick story about my mediation right now. If you guys follow my story, there's there's a tenant that burned my house, not house, my garage on fire by accident. Okay, so definitely wasn't by purpose. And so like I honestly thought this would be a slam dunk easy conversation. It's like, you burned my garage down. You know, I think it's a good time for you to leave. And like I'll absorb all of the cost, right? Because I knew this person didn't have money. I know that like they're struggling to make rent payment and all of that. It's like, and even though it was an accident, they caused like $50,000 in damages. It's not cheap, right? So I was like, maybe I can leverage this to see if they'd move on. And for this particular person, you know, no matter how nice I was, they're like, look, Austin, I have nothing to lose, right? You can take me to court. You can sue me. They're like, I don't have anything to give you. It's like, so I'm going to stay put until you kick me out. And I was like, oh, that's a professional tenant through and through, right? Like, they're just like, and I was just like, look, like, I'm trying to be nice. I'm not going to take you to court or anything. That 40, like that burnt thing, like, let me deal with it, right? Like, I understand it's an accident. But, you know, like, I just can't afford to fix this thing. I need to sell this property, right? Like, this is where it's come down to. This is just like, I'm not able to afford to fix it. I just need to get rid of the property. And I don't want to come after you for the 40,000 because I know it's an accident. So why don't you try to find another place to move out? And they're just like, no, we're going to sit here. You can sue us. We have nothing anyway. So I was like, damn, like that's, I have no choice. Like they know I'm squeezing blood from a stone. So like there's cases where you can run across someone like that. You have every right to work something out, but they're just like, they're, what do you call it? Professional tenants. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's up to that point, you know, that's you've done what you can, right? So
I honestly thought I was very fair. I was like, I'll eat the $40,000 loss. Apparently that's not enough. Okay. There's some questions here. Oh, trying to find there. Oh, here you go. This is a good question. How long does mediation discussions take? Are you doing these like in one conversation? Are you doing them like over weeks, days? Like how does that look like?
Yeah, the fastest conversation I have is just it's in 3 hours. And the longest that ever happened to me was it takes four attempts, and those extra 3 attempts was because of follow-ups. You know, there are certain if I know that the tenant is willing to continue on with the communication and there's interest in terms of like wants to resolve the conversation, then I would follow up with them as well too. This is where it's appropriate. So. And what
Doing
else?
those follow-ups, I'm curious. So obviously I know that you're going face to face. Are you doing the follow-ups face to face as well, or you're doing it over the phone?
Yeah, so this is where initially I would do face to face. Depending on the situation, I might want to go back one more time. But most generally speaking, once the tenant knows who I am and they're familiar with my approach and they at least are familiar who I am, then they're willing to just do everything over the phone. But what I would do is what I would do myself. This is myself alone. After they've agreed, signed paperwork that they're leaving, I will actually follow up with them in person, just check on them, see if there's anything else I can do to help them as well too. So, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. And when you say follow up, like, are these additional 3-hour calls every time, or they're like quicker calls?
These conversations are a lot shorter. You know, it's very simple. You know, have you thought about what I spoke to you last time, and then from there, they would voice what they have to, and then from there, I'll be able to understand. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Awesome. We're gonna get to the questions. We have a couple here. I'm just trying to see. Okay, so we answered that one.
Yep.
We answered this one. What are the different questions? Here we go. Is there any key questions that you ask the tenant during mediation? Like, are there a couple of go-to questions that you have when you first introduce yourself to a tenant?
Yeah. So I would first you mentioned a great thing. Introduce yourself, because 90% of my mediation, when I get feedback from tenants, is that they don't even know the person that approached them, which is the landlord. They don't even introduce themselves. They just go in there and tell them that it's time to leave, time to get out of my property. And that's like the most horrible way to start the conversation. The second part I would do is, stay calm. Emotions are rise and high. You'll be surprised that most of the fail landlords that tell me that they attempted to have a conversation with tenant all fail because they were too emotional. They may not know it, but when I listen to their story, I'll say, I hope you didn't say that. And when they said that, they caught themselves. They're like, oh shoot, I actually said that. And now they understand why the tenant no longer wants to talk to them. It takes a third person like myself to figure out what went wrong. And then that way I go in there and I do a different approach. And that's why the tenant is able to communicate with me and willing to go back and talk to their landlord to resolve the conversation.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay, so this was a follow-up to this question. Nisha's on fire. Okay,
Yeah,
have you
Nisha.
ever encountered a situation? Oh, no, not this one. Sorry. Here
Yeah.
we go. In cases where tenants refuse cash for keys, what are other incentive structures? Delinquent tenants only, right? Do you offer, if someone's like behind on rent, let's say, let me ask you this. I don't think we covered it. Let's say someone is delinquent on rent. Are you offering them cash for keys? Or how are you just like telling them to leave? You'll clear rent. They don't have to pay it. Like, I know it's situational based, but what have you done?
No, I never offered. I don't offer. I actually want to hear what the reason. Sometimes it's not really to cash keys. Maybe initially the delinquent tenant may have wanted to like cash keys, but after hearing their issue and seeing that there's a solution to it. There's always a solution.
Right.
Something. I just need to understand to come in. And a lot of times it doesn't have to be cash keys, and it's just simple as like I just need some transportation. I just need to go somewhere. I just don't want to go through the court system. That's why I need cash keys so that I can pay off some of the expenses. I was like, well, what if there's a solution to that? I just need to talk to the landlord. The landlord needs to be comfortable with the request. And this is where I make the tenant and the landlord come together and have a conversation to find out whether both sides agree to it. And that's exactly what I do.
Okay, gotcha. Awesome. It's a unique one. How do you mediate dispute between tenants in a multi-unit where both claim the other is a problem? Have you run across something like this?
Yeah, actually, I did one like last month. It was a students. They were just one story. Okay, so I had to talk to all the different units, and everyone had a different story. One said that the person is loud because they were just brats. They're young students. Okay, this gentleman was like a 40-year-old, so he wants his piece. Understandable. The student were complaining that the older gentleman, the 40-year-old, is he's too heavy and he's stomping on the ground too much, and it bothers them. And they didn't feel like they had they shouldn't be penalized because they're making too much loud noises. So what I did? It was very simple. I asked the permission from the landlord if I can handle the situation. Let me do what I do best, and the landlord just told me just to all authorities given to you, make it happen. I brought everyone, all the tenants, into one room and let them all yell at each other, let them all steam off, and then next thing you know, they started to talk. Next thing you know, they started to work out a solution. So that's exactly what I did.
That's interesting. Yeah. And were you there during that argument when
it was so uncomfortable. The stuff that I hear a lot is very uncomfortable, but you know what? You have to have a thick skin and you have to be prepared that when you have these hard talks, they're going to be turning to you because you're basically the middle person. They're going to turn their eyes to you, say that, hey, they said something rude. I don't like it. Do something about it. And this person said, no, I didn't say anything rude. Like, do something about it. And then this is where I have to facilitate the conversation. And that's exactly my role. I don't help them reach. I help them make a conclusion to themselves. I only facilitate. I only listen, and that's it. And
I see. So you sit down. Okay, that's a very interesting approach,
Yeah.
actually. So you bring, because if they're alone, they're gonna go at it. But they like you being there as a neutral third party. They look to you
Yeah.
as like, hey, you almost play devil's advocate sometimes, or you pry with more questions if there's something that doesn't make sense. Because people are so stubborn to their own thoughts. It's nice to have a third party there during those sort of discussions. So.
Yeah, I mean the landlord has. I have to say in my scenario, the landlord has done something similar, but they cannot handle the situation. They cannot handle the listen. Like landlords, these days, majority of landlords. I'm not saying everyone, but most landlords, they all have a side gig, like as in like a full-time job, and they also have childrens and everything. Like there's nothing wrong for you doing this yourself, but is your time valuable? Like how valuable is your time? Do you want the headache? And that's exactly why people call me, because they don't want to deal with this headache. It's too intimidating. And it is intimidating. And I'm very professional at what I do. And so that allows me to hear everyone's side of the story. And that's why I'm able to facilitate the conversation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay. Last question here before we wrap up. Nisha wanted me to ask, have you ever had a mediation case where the landlord was in the wrong? How did you navigate that? So, that's a good question.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Majority of my cases, it's actually the landlords is not at fault at all. So I haven't came to this case, so I'm gonna have to say I haven't been through this scenario before. No.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes when people are reaching out to you, it's because I imagine they've either already exhausted the legal route and it's taking too long. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's what I imagine, right?
Yeah.
Or it's a non-payment of rent or something along those lines, and then they're just like, okay, like, can you help me with this situation, right?
Yeah. But but this is a very fair question. I've not all scenarios are favorable to the landlords. There's really good tenants, and I know there's some really shady landlords. Perhaps perhaps maybe one day I'll encounter that, but at this time I haven't had any. It was mainly the landlords who's being taken advantage. That's why they contact me.
Well, awesome, Alvin. Really appreciate you jumping on here and answering the questions here from our audience. I'm sure everyone got tremendous value from this. If someone wants to reach out to you, get in contact with you, how could they best do so?
Yeah, so the best way to reach out to me is my website, www.winwithtlm.com. I also have an Instagram page, which Austin, you can feel free to share them. I have two of them. I have my personal one, and I also have my tenant landlord mediation IG page. Feel free to reach out to any of these three platforms. I'll be in touch with you.
Awesome. Really appreciate you jumping on here, man. Guys, you will get, for those who registered, you'll get an email with all of Alvin's information. I'll also drop it on the Facebook group after as well. There'll be a re-recording of this, so if you guys missed anything, feel free to rewind back and watch through. Again, really appreciate you jumping on, man. Hope you guys got a ton of value, and until next time, everyone, live smart, invest smarter, and live better.
Thanks for having me, Austin. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in.